Hi, I'm Bill Carmody. I'm the Marketing Whisperer, and today I have Michael Docherty here with his book, Collective Disruption, and I'm really happy to have him on the program today. Hi, Michael.
Hey, Bill. It's great to be here.
Awesome. So I wanted to basically kick this off talking a little bit about collective disruption. We hear a lot about disruption in our industry, and it's kind of banded around, and it's become sort of almost a generic term. So I really like how you've narrowed in on collective disruption. Do you want to define what that is in this industry and sort of why it's different?
Yeah, well, I certainly thought that the word disruption would capture people's attention because it is such a hot word and definitely overused. But it is, it's a word that means a lot of different things to different people, doesn't it? If you're a big company, it's what you're afraid the startups are going to do to you.
Yeah.
And you're trying to avoid it. And if you're a startup, it's what you're out to do to the incumbents in the industry. And I actually in the book talk about transformative innovation. And to me, it's a more positive connotation of the fact that, yes, you want to disrupt markets and really create new change, but you don't have to do it against each other. There are ways you can actually collaborate.
Absolutely. If you don't mind, I'm going to read a quote that you specifically said in the book, which I loved. It's a good description of collective disruption is about harnessing the power of two seemingly disparate groups and aligning the best of both worlds at each stage of the value creation process. What I love about that is the two disparate groups you're talking about is both large enterprise as well as small business. So why do they need each other?
Well, first of all, I want to emphasize the fact that they are very, very different, right? That they do feel like opposites, but just like a yin and a yang, I really do think these are opposite sides of a coin. That they're absolutely kind of an interdependent pair, and that to me is a real basic premise that they do need each other, just like a yin and a yang does. That from a practical standpoint, corporations today. The definition of innovation has changed, and what we used to call innovation is now what it takes just to stay in the game.
Okay.
So that new definition of innovation is transformative new business creation is a bigger part of the strategy than ever before.
And pause there for a second, because I think that's a really important critical point, that it used to be that innovation is what got you ahead, right? But the point you make in the book, which I think is brilliant, is innovation just keeps you at status quo. So if you're not innovating, you're probably going to go out of business anyway. So you're going to be on the decline. But if you are innovating, you're kind of just keeping up with the Joneses. You need transformative innovation to be able to take you what innovation used to do for you even 5-10 years ago, right?
Right. And it's not that transformative innovation is new, right? I mean, startups have been, companies have been created around it from the beginning, but what's changed is it's a more central part of the strategy. It's more central than it's ever been before. It's a bigger part of the portfolio. And the bad news for corporations is what they're terrible at. They're great at the incremental and optimizing the core. They're a big complex machine that's all about brand building and effective distribution. But all the things that it takes to be more transformative and disruptive are the things that they aren't good at. And that's why they need startups. Now, startups are doing fine, but at the same time, I think there's a missed opportunity there, which is, at one level, it's harder and harder for early stage startups to get funding. And, secondly, a lot of times when it comes to exiting, they may be held hostage because a venture capital firm may want to keep them in the portfolio until they can get a 10 or a 12x return. If they were to look at, it's not going to always be the best path, but they should be looking at a path of partnering with corporations, both because they can kind of reverse engineer the startup in a way that's going to fit the corporate partner in a bigger way and potentially help them build a bigger and better startup.
Well, and I think that one of the key points you made, I want to just reinforce, is that there tends to be sort of an incrementality. When you look at large enterprises of a certain size, right? You get to a certain size in your organization and you tend to figure out ways to increment, right? Which is like, how can I be 5, 10, 20% better? But, by their very nature, entrepreneurs are looking at exponential change. That is the very nature of disruption. And so the challenge is you've got entrepreneurial spirit who really wants to go out there and disrupt industries. And then you have large enterprises that have built these like large behemoths of organizations, and they need each other, because if you're going to be disruptive, you need to be able to have the support support for growth, and that's what entrepreneurs need. And if you're going to be as sort of a large enterprise, you need to have that sort of entrepreneurial spirit within your organization. You can try to cultivate it internally, but oftentimes working with outside partners are really going to be what tips the scales. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's an and, right? I mean, there's a lot of buzz these days about companies adopting lean startup principles and becoming more entrepreneurial. And don't get me wrong, I'm a supporter of that, but that can't be the only answer. That to me is just part of the answer of you need to be able to work at the cadence of startups, but ultimately you can't be a startup again. And you got to be good at what you're good at. But if you've got some of those entrepreneurial approaches, you can get better at the core innovation and you can learn to work more effectively with startups. But ultimately, and it's interesting because there have been two historical kind of schools of thought. One says, let's be entrepreneurial or be able to do it all ourselves. And some people talk about that as ambidextrous innovation.
Right.
There are very few companies that can pull that off. Maybe Google, they're trying it with Alphabet, but not every company is Google. And then the other end of the spectrum is that we're just going to buy it. You know, we're never going to be good at this, so let's just acquire it. And both of those are missing the opportunity to co-create, to basically get on board earlier and not just acquire or license opportunities, but actually co-create them and get engaged with these startups much earlier so that you're reverse engineering it, you're driving it with the right kind of value, and you're infusing that startup spirit into the company at the same time.
Well, and Michael, one of the things that I'm interested in is you have actually had a fascinating career, and I'd love to sort of talk to you about you personally now for a minute, because in each of the chapters, you have at least one, oftentimes two or three examples from Fortune 500 companies where they've either got it right in most cases, or in some cases, learning lessons, right? And I don't look at it as failure as much as, hey, this thing didn't work, and here's what I learned from not making that work, so here's how I'm doing it differently. Tell me a little bit about some of the companies that you've been able to help, and some of the, any of the examples that you like in that book that you'd like to sort of call out, because I think they're really, really powerful.
Well, thanks. First from a personal perspective, and I talk about some of these from my own experiences. I've been an entrepreneur, I've been a corporate executive, and I've been on the investment side. One of the examples I talk about in the book is my experience at Sunbeam, and this is some years back. But I came into Sunbeam after they had just kicked out an executive named Chainsaw Al Dunlap. That the older people in your audience may know that name, but it was a company in shambles, and it was really an opportunity for us to learn to partner. And that was, in a lot of ways, my first experience at open innovation, which is very much related to collective disruption. Open innovation is a trend that's been taking place for 10 plus years. That is all about large companies recognizing, not all the good ideas are inside their four walls.
Right.
It isn't necessarily about partnering with startups, but more about technologies often and licensing as much as anything else. So at Sunbeam, we were in bankruptcy, and we didn't have a choice but to learn to partner with entrepreneurs and startups, and that experience taught me some core lessons. Number one, about the importance of partnering, and something else that's really stuck with me that I think is relevant to all this, which is learning to let go. Because one of the biggest barriers to this kind of partnering, is the need for control. And when you're accountable for something, the idea of depending on someone else to deliver it, and now someone out of your company is absolutely terrifying. It's a good word for it. So it was a great, learning experience for me to learn to let go, and that stuck with me. So it's something that you see throughout the book too. Is that. Since I left Sunbeam and have been consulting and coaching and teaching, I've had the great fortune to work with some great companies. Some of the ones I talk about in the book, quite frankly, one of the reasons I wanted to write the book was to highlight the fact that this is coming and you better get on board with it.
Yes.
But in order to be effective at that, you got to provide some hope.
Yes.
And, I really think we're really in the early stages of this. That as much as there's a lot of buzz right now about partnering with startups, very few people have cracked the code, and no one has cracked the code completely.
Well, and I think that's one of the things I wanted to get to is, you're giving some advice to sort of the large enterprises of letting go of the illusion of control. And I'll call it an illusion because I don't think there is as much control as anyone thinks they have anyway. But I think the question I would ask is, what is your advice to the entrepreneurs who are starting out and looking for ways to sort of work instead of just disrupting entire industries and trying to take down, massive Fortune 500 companies, which is obviously one path. What do you recommend recommend in terms of entrepreneurs who do want to work with the larger organizations, and how can they be a better partner and help them support that collective disruption?
Well, and to your point, this isn't going to be right for every entrepreneur. Somebody may want to be, they may want to build a big business and go for an IPO and become the next Mark Zuckerberg.
Right.
But those who might be a little bit more, I'll call it pragmatic, might see this as a great opportunity to basically increase your odds. Yeah. Because the odds against you with trying to get private money and grow something big enough to have a meaningful exit are still pretty slim. Not that it's a guaranteed deal with corporates, but you're stacking the deck in your favor because, if you look at it from the other perspective, anytime you're starting a startup, you're looking for need, aren't you?
Right.
And so this is about not just the customer need, but there's a need out there for companies looking for these kinds of companies. So why not try to build your company in a way that makes it attractive to them? So
that's what I want to get to. So specifically, if you were basically an entrepreneur, if you're starting a business today and you wanted to be more attractive to the likes of these Fortune 1 or 500 companies, how could you basically build your business in such a way that you are attractive to those large enterprise companies?
Well, you have to, it is a bit of a dance. And one of the things I counsel entrepreneurs on is rightly so, you shouldn't engage in a way that limits you too early with corporates because you need to create some value, and you don't want to create a situation where you've designed your startup only to be of interest to that company and
right.
then you have. That said, though, I propose you get involved with corporates much sooner than typically startups think about this. They tend to want to build the product and then create a snazzy pitch and then take it to corporates and show it to them.
Right.
The better approach is to actually engage with them even before you even have the idea, or if you have the idea, to do some customer development and just test the waters. And you're doing two things. You're validating that you're on the right track in a non-committal way. It's a conversation.
Sure.
But you're also getting on the radar screen. And that's really what these corporates want to know is, you want to be in their ecosystem and in their constellation, if you will, so that, when it comes time to do something more serious, you're there.
Well, so let me ask this a different question. So in the context of trying to become sort of a co-creator with an organization, let's say I've got my eye on working with Google or IBM or one of those other groups, right? I know there's basically a problem they're struggling with. And so what I want to do is basically say, here's part of the solution, not the whole thing, but here's some things that I've been thinking about that I think would be an interesting way to solve the problem that you've very publicly been talking about. Because that's one of the advantages, right? Is it basically, when you're in that kind of a business, there are lots and lots of opportunities to see publicly what people are struggling with. And if you have a solution, you can approach them. Is that kind of what you're thinking about?
Yeah, it is. And I think of it as concentric circles, that if you look at it from the company perspective of, they've got their internal team and their internal strategy, then they've got their supply base, then they have this circle of friends, and then they've got the world at large. And that circle of friends is where you want to be. You want to be in the place where, for example, Procter & Gamble brings together a group of those friends every year and shares their strategies beyond what they do publicly, not under NDA, but shares it with a group of people who they consider a friendly audience.
And trusted, right?
And trusted is an important word there. But again, not under an NDA. There's that element of balancing risk and benefit that, being in that circle allows the corporate to have a network of entrepreneurs that are innovating on their behalf. Your perspective from an entrepreneur is what corporates and what VCs and accelerators do you want to engage with to get on the radar screens and to kind of find out what's bubbling up as the bigger issues, not just with one company,
right,
but a number of companies. So that one thing you might do is identify a number of companies in an area that might be interested in a solution, find a way to engage more deeply with one or two, and with the end game of, can I strike a deal with them where perhaps I design for them for either a period of exclusivity or a vertical industry exclusivity that allows me to still sell to others, and or position it in a way that it's a quick exit to them and through an acquisition.
It's great. I think it's great advice. I absolutely loved your book. I really think it's powerful because I think that for most people who are looking at disruption, I mean, today is this is the best time in our collective careers, right? That we're seeing disruption happening left and right. And I think it's interesting because most entrepreneurs sort of go to that sort of, I want to disrupt an entire industry and do this all on my own. And I think what you've done is you've very well detailed a viable alternative to going it alone and saying, here's how you can basically go after and work with the established players and still be profitable, still be successful, and potentially have a great exit even with that partner. So I love it. It's great.
Yeah. Now it's a new skill set too, right? And there's this frustration of dealing with companies because they're going to slow you down at times, and you've got to be careful not to be. And I could give you some examples of startups that have engaged with large. An example of a large consumer health company.
Yeah,
got engaged in a big way, and when the corporate got involved to the point where they were managing the clinical studies, it actually got to the point where the startup died because they got so slowed down. They missed some of the submission requirements because they were so caught up in the bureaucratic checks and balances that they killed themselves. And so there's a dark side, but I'm so optimistic that the benefits so outweigh the cost that the opportunity is to keep enough separation that you can still be entrepreneurial, but enough integration that you're getting the insights and the engagement and the string, if you will, to potentially have them buy you later.
Well, and I think to me, what's really fascinating about that approach is that, entrepreneurs are risk takers by their nature. And so essentially, the risks going in. I think with the tale of that story that I would sort of communicate back is if this sort of partnership, it looks like it's driving your business in the ground, that's the beauty of collective disruption. You don't have to stick with it in that sort of context. You have to be able to say, look, I am independent. I'm not part of your company. We either have to basically get on the right track or cut through this bureaucracy, or I have to cut this line and go on and do something else. And I think that's a beautiful way to sort of also force the conversation into a, hey, are we doing this together or not?
Yeah. And I talk in the book about the different ways that companies and startups and entrepreneurs are experimenting, really. I talk about, in some cases, companies like Johnson & Johnson and Cisco are moving ideas to the outside and actually letting startups create opportunities for them with a string to pull it back in. In the case of J&J, actually, they're doing this without even an idea sometimes, or they'll find an interesting, proven scientist, work with him or her to develop the idea with no equity promise. The scientist keeps it. The idea being that J&J is so interested in being in the deal flow that they want that early engagement. So Coca-Cola is doing similar things. Cisco actually has a very interesting model where they're using a lot of different approaches between bringing entrepreneurs to the inside, moving ideas to the outside. One example is a case where they started a whole new business and they do this on a serial basis with entrepreneurs who are ex-Cisco employees. You could do these things internally to say we can do better by seeding the idea with a set of proven friends who have worked for us before, giving them funding, letting them start the business. In one case, I think it was $70 million investment, and then they bought it back 2 or 3 years later for about $200 million.
Wow.
And, seems like an expensive proposition, but it's $1 billion+ business for Cisco, and they recognize they would never.
It's a small number to them to look at the bigger upside that they see as a tremendous growth opportunity.
Yeah, and so it's a win-win for both, obviously.
So if you're a small business or an entrepreneur that's looking to get involved with, say, Cisco or Coca-Cola or even the medical community, Johnson & Johnson, what's the best place to start? Where do they go to sort of make those initial introductions and connections? Any recommendations there?
Well, there are definitely more and more public challenges, and you'll see places like Cisco has a group of Internet of Everything centers. That's their version of the Internet of Things. They're really building the business strategy around that. They also have a program in Europe called Challenge Up, which is similar but not an in-place program, where the Internet of the IOE centers are physical locations where they're bringing startups in to co-create with them. So if you look at what the corporates you're interested in are doing publicly, you'll often find that they're promoting challenges and just engaging in those would be one way to go. More and more corporations are engaging through proven accelerators like Techstars, the Brandery, where I'm a mentor, and others, where they're becoming part of that ecosystem and sharing their problems. That's another way. One of the cautions I would give is that there's what I would call pilot burnout going on, which is so much of these very inexpensive pilots, and sometimes corporations will ask for a pilot without really having much skin in the game, running yourself in circles. So, so be careful not to just respond to a request for a pilot. Make sure that there's real skin in the game and a real need and an end game in that. But very often, you'll find through through their public disclosures and through the networks you have, as well as the accelerators, that it's becoming a more formalized part of the process.
That's wonderful. One last question. Is there anything else that we haven't covered today? There's so much great content in this book. If there's anything else you wanted to leave entrepreneurs with in terms of either words of encouragement or insights, what would that be?
Well, like you said early on, I mean, there's never been a better time to be an entrepreneur, both because of the speed and the opportunities in front of us with all of the technologies and hyper connectivity of everything. I think there's another part of this, which is that whether you're a corporate dropout or a lifelong entrepreneur or a new entrepreneur, I think the career path of the future is changing too. And that I would encourage entrepreneurs to be more broad-based, to expose yourself to other industries, expose yourself to other opportunities. I really see, and I see this in practice, really powerful career paths of doing a startup, moving into a corporate. Cisco has this all through it, where they acquire startups, those people become employees, they go start another one and come back in. It's a powerful career path because everyone wins. You become a more, broad-based entrepreneur, and the corporations win too. So I think it's going to change even the way we define what the organization is in the future. So lots of opportunities for entrepreneurs.
That's wonderful. Thank you very much, Michael. Your book, Collective Disruption, highly recommended. It's a fantastic book, and I think anyone who's interested in this category would pick it up. It's a virtual roadmap to how do you basically disrupt without having to necessarily take out your direct large competitors, instead working with them in a collaboration way that basically is going to take you to the same end game you're looking for. So thank you very much for being on the show today. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Bill. I enjoyed it.